Today we're going to be generating a novel idea using the Story Engine cards. The Story Engine deck is a deck of 5 different types of cards: agent cards, aspect cards, anchor cards, engine cards, and conflict cards. And together they work to create the basic elements of a story. And in this video I'm going to show you a method that I have come up with to create a very quick and mostly complete novel idea. This is an exercise that I started doing several months before I began doing YouTube, when I noticed that my energy and motivation levels were really low. It actually turned out that there was a medical reason for that I will probably discuss in a different video. But I always noticed when I played with the cards or did any kind of solo RPG thing, even for like 20 minutes, my energy would increase and I would just feel a little bit more focused and ready for my day. I also will probably be using the Deck of Worlds cards, which is also made by Peter Tchaikovsky, who also made the Story Engine cards. They create settings, whereas Story Engine creates, well, plots and stories. And I find that using them together, you just add another dimension to your storytelling. So this story that we're about to build here could have multiple genres because the Story Engine cards, there's fantasy themed one, there's sci-fi, cyberpunk. I have everything all mixed together, so we're gonna get a really interesting mix. So I'm gonna take you through this quick novel outlining method using the cards, and hopefully it inspires you to work on your novel today or whatever other creative work you are engaged in. Okay, let's draw some cards. Stories start with people. So we are going to begin with the agent cards, which are kind of like the people or the jobs. It just kind of gives you a quick starting character type that you can kind of build out from. So our first card here, a hunter, a collector, a killer, or a researcher. So the first card that I usually draw when I'm playing around like this, I generally consider to be the protagonist. That's not necessarily the case, but when I'm playing like this, I go with the option that strikes me the most, or whatever is appealing to me in the moment. Killer is jumping out to me, and so is collector. What are they collecting? Could really be anything. So now that we have the beginnings of a character, I will pull out the aspect cards. And the aspect cards are like the adjectives that you can use for people, things, whatever. So I usually like to draw 2. We have long lost, bitter, charmed, or giant. A long lost collector is interesting. The collector is long lost. What could that mean? A bitter collector, perhaps. Charmed, maybe. All right, let's put that aside and draw something else. The second one, we have elegant, nurturing, ominous, and truth-telling. I like a truth-telling collector. They cannot tell a lie. And, charmed. Actually combining charmed and truth-telling, maybe they're under a spell, kind of Ella Enchanted type situation. They have a spell cast on them and they have to tell the truth. It's a curse. So let's say that we have a charmed, truth-telling collector. Still not totally clear on what genre we're working in here. Maybe urban fantasy, could be sci-fi still, kind of a fantasy sci-fi mix, but let's continue on. The next type of cards I pull out when I'm doing this is the engine cards. The engine cards are like the motivations of the Story Engine deck. Literally the engine cards of the Story Engine deck. All right, we have a horror-themed one here, and there's 2 options, so we choose one. There's Wants to Survive and Wants to Settle an Old Score. Either one of these is good. Let's do Wants to Settle an Old Score. I wonder what kind of old score they want to settle. And once I get this far, I start to pull back and think about the other characters in the story. So we have a charmed, truth-telling collector who wants to settle an old score with whom, right? So this gives us the opportunity to introduce another character, presumably the antagonist of the story, right? So we return to our agent cards and we draw those. So we have an android, an enhanced, a data miner, or a neural net. So we are working from, I think that's the, maybe it's the cyberpunk expansion. So okay, we're moving more into sci-fi, which is always fun. I kind of like an android or maybe a neural net. I've been rewatching The Next Generation at the moment. So I mean, Android is sticking out to me, but also neural net keeps it open in case we want our enemy or antagonist to be a whole kind of system. Let's do Android, and let's draw some aspect cards for our Android. The first one is a fantasy expansion card. You can tell by the little icon on the bottom there. Masterwork, Trapped, Chaotic, or Merfolk. Merfolk Android is kind of fun. I mean, Masterwork, we can assume that an android is probably literally a masterwork. I like Trapped and I like Chaotic. Go with Chaotic, and let's draw another one. We have Blighted, Brilliant, Icy, or Thoughtful. Yeah, none of these are really jumping out at me. And you can always set cards aside or just not use them. You can always draw different cards. So we have Unlucky, Ghostly, Corrupted, Indestructible. I don't know what I like better, Ghostly or Indestructible. I mean, androids are pretty tough, presumably. Ghostly is interesting. Maybe it's a machine that is sort of out of phase with our existence and it only appears at certain times. Maybe this android is the ultimate find, right? And maybe this android has slighted our collector in some way and he can only retrieve or collect or fight this android in certain places at certain times. Yeah, let's go with Ghostly, with the meaning that it's out of phase with our concept of time and reality. I'm starting to get quite into this now. Now we go to our engine cards. What does our android want? We know that our collector wants to settle a score with the android, but what's the android's deal, right? Ooh, another horror card. Wants to destroy a monster whose only weakness is, or wants to catch a serial killer whose calling card is. Oh, interesting. I kind of like the idea of a serial killer, but who's the serial killer? Is the serial killer the collector? I mean, presumably the android can't die in the sense that humans can die. They can be deactivated. Yes, let's go with catching a serial killer. Yeah, I wonder if the collector is the serial killer. I'm not getting that sense. I'm not sure how they're connected. Usually I have a pretty good sense of who the protagonist is by this point. I'm not too sure yet. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna use the anchor cards. The anchor cards are places and things. I'm gonna draw 3 of those and we can kind of suss out what the serial killer calling card is. This is the Cthulhu type expansion. We have a hamlet, a lighthouse, a shipwreck, or a shroud. Okay, let's draw another one. We have an alignment, a sacred herb, a gemstone, and a higher plane. This is like the gods expansion, I think. And finally, we have a pen, a bomb, a piece of evidence, or a hideout. Okay, I got it. Let's go with a sacred herb because I want to connect this back to our charmed truth-telling collector. Whatever is affecting the collector was caused by this herb. And perhaps our collector believes that this android is involved. Maybe the android was built by the serial killer. The android is out of phase with our existence and knows that the serial killer is still alive, still at work, and is trying to stop the serial killer. And perhaps the serial killer tried to kill the collector once. Maybe the android was involved, but the collector thinks that the android is responsible. Yeah, okay, that's sort of cool. I like that. Okay, so let's learn a little bit more about the serial killer. So we're gonna draw another agent card. Now we have a sci-fi expansion. We have a prisoner, programmer, a telekinetic, a test subject? I think we're gonna go with the obvious answer here, which is a programmer. I think that the serial killer made the android. Let's learn about our programmer. Radical, rich, advanced, refurbished. Let's go radical. And the second descriptor for our programmer serial killer, tender, shattered, pensive, fearless. Should we do a tender serial killer? Is that too weird? Or shattered? Let's go pensive. They're careful. Serial killer is pensive, but he's a radical. What does the serial killer want? Well, to kill people, presumably, but wants to stop the government from discovering, or wants to light the powder keg of revolution with the match of. Wants to stop the government from discovering. Perhaps this programmer has created this out-of-phase technology where you can send a person to be slightly out of phase, out of time with the rest of reality. And of course, if this technology was in the wrong hands, you could create a very effective spy network. Now, him being a serial killer, they probably don't have the best of intentions. Perhaps this is how the serial killer has managed to stay undiscovered for all of this time. They go out of phase with reality, they can kind of move around, nobody can notice them, and then they bring themselves into this reality, and I also keep saying reality, but they bring themselves back into this time state, and then they kill the person that they want to kill. However, this herb, perhaps he poisons them, or that's just the calling card that they leave to say this was my kill. And perhaps when he tried to kill the collector, whatever he did didn't work. The herb that he administered made him tell the truth all the time. And instead of dying, he is left with this side effect of always having to tell the truth, for good or for ill. Now, the only thing we haven't done is used the conflict card to create consequences and twists in the story. Okay, so we read this as our person wants to stop the government from discovering the technology, but a friend will die and they must choose who, but something that should have stayed dead will rise again. So we can apply this to any one of these. It kind of applies to the android, or it could apply to this collector as well. I don't know if I want to bring like undead stuff into this. We've already got kind of sci-fi stuff happening, but a friend will die and they must choose who. Who would be the android's ally? Or who would be the collector's ally? And right now we kind of had to make a choice, like who's the protagonist of the story? And I'm inclined to say the collector because, you know, they're chasing the android, then they discover that the android is not the true enemy, that it's the creator of the android. Maybe they end up teaming up and going after the programmer serial killer. I think I'm gonna add this to the collector. Maybe this comes to pass in the third act and they have to choose, you know, between the android and whoever their friend is, who we will create momentarily. Let's draw another conflict card and apply it to our cards. We have another horror one, but something evil will be unleashed in the world, but they will have to invite something evil inside. Yeah, I think this applies to the android because the android is trying to stop the serial killer, but the serial killer is trying to stop the government from using or abusing this phasing technology. And if the phasing technology is in the hands of the government or maybe some, you know, shadowy parties, then that could be potentially dangerous as well. Or, you know, that's the choice that they have to make. Do they let the serial killer live or do they destroy the phasing technology? Do we give a conflict to the serial killer? Sure, let's see. Another horror card. I really shuffled these very well. But they must return to the site of an old trauma, but their darkest desire will be revealed. I mean, the darkest desire would be the serial killer's kills, I suppose, but they must return to the site of an old trauma is interesting. I kind of like that. The serial killer is on a mission to stop the government from using the phasing technology or discovering the phasing technology, or from having the phasing technology fall into the wrong hands. But to do that, the serial killer must go back to some traumatic place. And actually, we drew these other aspect cards, right? We have the Hamlet, the Lighthouse, this card, and we also have Hideout, Pen. I like a Hamlet. That certainly brings a spooky vibe. I'm gonna put Hamlet under here to signify that that's the place of the serial killer's trauma. Perhaps it's his hometown. And it's always generally 4 people that I end up creating, and they, as you can see, they become intertwined with each other. The last person I'm going to create is this friend. But a friend will die and they must choose who. And I'm going to create this collector's friend, an innocent who gets involved in all of this, or maybe the collector pulls in this innocent person. So we have a robot, a bodyguard, a supercomputer, or an artificial intelligence. So very similar to our android. I like the bodyguard. I'm not entirely sure why a collector might have a bodyguard, but maybe it's not their bodyguard. Maybe it's their partner, or maybe it's an ex of some kind who gets sort of pulled into all this when the collector starts going after the android. And maybe the serial killer starts targeting his wife or ex-wife. I kind of like that, actually. Maybe it's cliche. You have haunted, valuable, petty, or peaceful. Haunted certainly fits with the theme. You know, she's seen a lot during her years as a bodyguard. Try another one. We have lawful, charismatic, labyrinthine, or half orcish. I mean, a lawful bodyguard would kind of make sense. You know, actually, this bodyguard isn't just a bodyguard. Maybe she is part of a intergalactic police force, or maybe she's a mercenary. Maybe she has been chasing this serial killer for a long time. So she gets drawn into this when the collector starts going after the android. She provides information and backstory. Maybe she helps the collector catch the android, and she realizes that the android was built by the serial killer. Their 2 stories come together. Maybe they are reluctantly working together. They get pulled into this mystery. Okay, so we have sort of a intergalactic thriller going on here. It's kind of cool. All right, so we have our 4 characters. I'm not going to draw an engine card for the bodyguard because we kind of know that she's going with the collector. She's involved in that, but she's also chasing the serial killer. So that's enough of a motivation for her. But I am going to draw a conflict card for her just to spice things up a little bit. But a killer will escape, but someone they could have saved will die. I mean, but a killer will escape. She is, that's her motivation. She's trying to catch a killer. But someone that they could have saved will die is interesting. Maybe the 3rd act of the story is sort of a Saw-like situation where they have been captured and they're put in sort of an impossible choice situation where they have to choose to escape a situation or save one another. And maybe the android is there too. Yeah, okay. Maybe this serial killer has some dirt on both of them and tries to pit them against one another. But really they have to all work together to stop this serial killer and stop the phasing technology from falling into the wrong hands, which the wrong hands is, the serial killer and probably the government too. Probably everybody. Just destroy the phasing technology. Maybe that's the solution. So we have our 4 people, and we have sort of a rough outline of a novel. We have a collector who is going after an android, who slighted him many, many years ago when the android tried to kill him. And he involves his ex-wife, the bodyguard, who is just trying to track down this serial killer. The serial killer is the one that got away many years ago, and she begrudgingly helps him. They find the android who is phasing in and out of time and who is always at specific places at specific times because the collector has been meticulously tracking all of this. But by the time they catch the android, they realize that it's really this serial killer, the one who built the android, that they should be going after. And so the three of them have to team up to catch the serial killer. However, just when they just start to work together and they just start to cooperate, the serial killer manages to capture all three of them and pits them against each other. And they have to decide, you know, do we fight each other so that one of us survives, or do we find a way to escape knowing that all of us could die? And the serial killer might escape. And this phasing technology that he's using to orchestrate all of this is going to be used by nefarious people, you know, government or not. Okay, and perhaps this all takes place, perhaps he brings them all to this hamlet of his that would, maybe the government's not watching this hamlet, maybe it's abandoned. It's the perfect place for him to keep his prisoners and his victims. Now I'm going to bring out the Deck of World cards to flesh out the setting, and that might also give us more information about our people. The Deck of World cards, I did a whole video on this previously that you can go back and check out. I'm filming this in October, so I am using a preview deck. Peter Tchaikovsky was kind enough to send me the deck and its expansion, so thank you very much, not sponsored, etc., etc. And it just happened to coincide with me filming this video. So I was playing around yesterday with combining the Deck of Worlds, which creates settings, with this technique of creating sort of a novel outline, and with great success. So I am very interested in fleshing out this hamlet where the serial killer brings his victims, or developed the phasing technology, or brings our three protagonists here for the third act final battle, or brutal massacring potentially. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do with the Deck of Worlds is I'm going to draw a region card, which is like the territory or the type of terrain that we're going to be dealing with. So we have a fantasy themed one, so we have Kingdom. Interesting, just because it's fantasy doesn't mean that it can't be used in sci-fi. We can interpret this as this hamlet that he lives in is on the outskirts of this old kingdom. Maybe this is the ruins, right? Maybe this kingdom was once a great civilization that was thriving in the galaxy, and now it's just little remembered, or it's fallen. The landmark cards, we have a pass and we have an airy. Our hamlet, should it be in a pass or an airy? I kind of like it being in a pass. Maybe there's a scene where the bodyguard has to save the collector from falling to his death, or maybe the android falls off the cliff and into the pass, or a cruel shot of like the android falling and then phasing out, right? And you don't know if they fall to the ground or not, or if the phasing saves them. So I like the hamlet that is in the pass, and it's tucked away. Nobody remembers. So let's draw the origin of this hamlet. We have site of an infamous lost convoy, shaped by extinct sand creatures. I mean, that would make sense for a pass. Origin of a gardening method founded by chefs. Site of an infamous lost convoy is interesting though. Maybe the serial killer was responsible for that. Let's do that. The namesake card generates names. We have of endless tracks. We have frozen, that grinds of coal. A hamlet of endless tracks. Frozen hamlet, the hamlet that grinds, or of coal. Perhaps it was an old mining town. I do like of endless tracks though. I mean, it's a pass, right? So that makes sense. Or the hamlet exists in the past. So we will say endless tracks. I'm gonna take this hamlet out here just so that we know that we are creating this hamlet. I'm gonna combine it with our Deck of Worlds. We have an attribute card which gives it a little flourish. It tells us what the town is known for, or it kind of adds to the origin. So this is a horror-themed one. We have known for a particular ghost, distrustful of outsiders, known for insect worship, or known for teeth. Actually, now that I'm really thinking about this, let's make a small change, right? On this card, there was origin of a gardening method. Up here, we have sacred herb, which the serial killer uses as like their calling card. Maybe this sacred herb only grows in this pass, and the serial killer has to return there to gather this herb because it's his calling card, it's what he uses. And because the hamlet is abandoned, nobody really knows about it, people have forgotten about it. Yes, that makes sense. Okay, so we've known for a particular ghost, distrustful of outsiders, known for insect worship, known for teeth. I like known for particular ghost because perhaps it's not just that this hamlet, this kingdom has been forgotten. Perhaps there's been a lot of stories about, people who go there don't come back. Maybe that's because the serial killer is at work. So I think there's just a lot of ghost stories. There's a lot of superstitions surrounding this planet, this hamlet, and people just don't go there in general. And the last card we will draw here is the Advent card, which creates specific happenings, sort of adventure hooks for the story. Now, we kind of know the general story, but this could add some background flavor to the story. It could add a little piece that fits together with the rest that's going on. We have a populous leader is gaining power through dangerous rhetoric, or mysterious sounds are being heard at night. Perhaps this entire planet, this kingdom that the hamlet is part of, perhaps it is not entirely abandoned. Perhaps the kingdom still exists, maybe not to its former glory, but there are still people who live there. And maybe early on in the story, or perhaps before the story begins, our bodyguard has gone to the kingdom throughout her investigation to try and find this serial killer. And she interviewed people there, and she, in her notes, wrote down that, weird sounds are being heard in the night from this ghost town of this hamlet. Maybe she never got to go to this hamlet because no one would take her there. Maybe the pass is naturally dangerous and she just couldn't get there, or got part of the way there and had to turn back. But she knows that there's something mysterious there. And then when the serial killer kidnaps them all and takes them to this hamlet, perhaps it's not just that they have to fight each other, they have to fight the environment as well. Perhaps this pass is collapsing. They either have to work together to leave or fight each other for escape. Yeah, and maybe they have to use the phasing technology to get out of there and then hopefully destroy it. Maybe in a twist, the collector does not destroy the phasing technology. That would be an interesting ending where they work together to escape. But in a twist, the collector dismantles the android and takes the phasing technology from the android, destroys the rest of it, but keeps it for himself. That would be very... So we've got sort of the end game location for like the third act, but where is the collector somewhat certain that the android is going to appear? Let's create that. So the first thing we're going to do is draw a region card. Ooh, an abyss. Ooh, so spooky. This is a very spooky location for our intergalactic horror thriller. And, ooh, a wreck or a strait. A wreck at the bottom of an abyss or near an abyss. Yep, makes sense. Maybe this collector has been to this wreck before. They were pilfering, stealing, researching the treasure in this wreck, and the serial killer sent the android, or was there with the android, to kill this collector. The serial killer had been stalking the collector, traced him here to this wreck where no one would be a witness to this killing, but the collector managed to fight him off. And so the collector knows that this android will appear again in this wreck. So he convinces his bodyguard ex-wife to accompany him. What is the origin of this wreck? The last known location of an evil entity. Yep, makes sense. Used for centuries of burials. Site of long unsolved serial murders. Yep. Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna do the long unsolved serial murders. Maybe it's not just that the serial killer was tracking the collector to this location. Maybe the collector knew that, hey, a lot of murders had been taking place on this wreck, and I'm interested in the history. Maybe there's some valuables of the victims left behind that could be sold for a pretty penny. I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna see what I can get. And the serial killer, it's part of his hunting grounds, happens to see the collector. Perhaps the serial killer is in the middle of killing somebody else, and this collector is a witness. And so that's why there were sort of half measures taken with killing this collector and why he ends up surviving. Yeah, okay. You think that you know the story, but then you start creating the locations and it adds a new depth to the story. You can already kind of see how we're creating little scenes in this story, right? Just by fleshing out the setting, the location. So that's really cool. All right, let's draw an attribute card. So this says shrouded in myth, used as a sanctuary, pacifistic? No, that's not how you say it. Pacifist, but more adjective with an IC. Or no written language. I mean, I like shrouded in myth, certainly fits. Let's draw maybe another one to add just another dimension to this, so we're not totally all horror-y. Irradiated landscape, hiding spot of world-ending tech. Now that is interesting. Maybe the collector already has heard tales of this phasing technology, and maybe the serial killer has hidden parts of this technology in this wreck, or maybe he just happened to do some of his work there in this wreck, or maybe because the serial murders are taking place in and around this area, there's been a lot of stories about people disappearing and appearing and that sort of thing. So maybe it's one of his hiding spots, right? Yeah, let's go with the hiding spot for the world-ending tech. I really love the colors, how they all go together. Everything's coming together quite nicely. Namesake. We have a perfume, of the revolution, meandering, or that laughs. I like the abyss that laughs. We can add this to any card. Maybe it's very echoey here, and it makes it even more spooky that people are disappearing and being murdered here. And finally, let's do an advent card. What is happening during the time of our story here? We have a 7 drought that could have disastrous consequences. Prominent figure is being exposed as a fraud. Yes, this ties together the serial killer programmer, right? Who wants to stop the government from discovering the phasing technology. Maybe the programmer works for the government and was doing, building his android, doing his phasing technology on the side. Maybe some government officials have gotten wind of his extracurriculars, we'll say. This serial killer has lost his job and is potentially on the verge of being exposed. His crimes and also this sort of phasing technology that he's developed, and whatever government that is, the planetary governments, what have you, they want to take that technology. So I think this is part of our programmer's sort of ticking clock. It's not just that he's a political revolutionary, he's trying to save his own skin. He's trying to not get exposed for killing a bunch of people and also developing the technology that allowed him to kill all these people. Again, adds a lot of depth, right? If you are enjoying the story, you can support the channel by subscribing on Patreon. The link is in the description. Okay, so we have a pretty much complete story here, but there is one more thing that I want to do with this story, and that is experiment with the adventure cards here. which are one of the expansions for Deck of Worlds. They are deliberately created to tie into the story engine cards. I found the adventure cards to be a really good creator of inciting events, so things that happen at the beginning of your story that sort of kick off the rest of the story. Now in our story, that could be where the collector witnesses the serial killer murdering someone and the android attacks him and infects him with this sacred herb that causes him to be truth-telling. Maybe that's the thing that disrupts his marriage to the bodyguard as well. It would be interesting to see if we could develop some kind of inciting incident that brings our collector and our bodyguard together to go after the android. And I find too with these adventure cards, when I was using them, I had to go through a couple of them to find one that really truly fit with the story that I was creating, because they are created for all genres. So there's different ones and they don't always fit. So, okay, the one we have here is Crash Landing. Something fell from the sky and crashed nearby. Locals claim it sits on damage in the middle of an impact crater. You know, Crash Landing could fit. It would be a very exciting opening to the story. It could also bring the bodyguard and the collector characters together. The bodyguard is there to manage the scene. She is drawn there because it's part of her investigation, or she discovers that it could be part of her investigation. She has jurisdiction. The collector is just there for his own profit. Perhaps he is drawn there because he heard that the kind of metal that is involved in the crash is connected to the android that he is trying to find, because maybe this android doesn't always appear at this wreck. He is also seen in other places, and maybe pieces of the android are coming off because he is phasing. It is physically damaging the android's body. So pieces of him have been found around the solar system, the galaxy, wherever they are. Some of that is in this wreckage. How we use this is we sort of use the sides to answer the questions of what fell. Well, we know that it's a piece of the android, but let's draw and see what physically else would be there. Is it a ship? What is it that fell out of the sky? Well, we have a castle, a warhammer, a siege, a farm. Maybe it's the android's arm that was part of this crash, and the android was carrying an ancient weapon just because androids can wield whatever they want. But maybe this particular hammer the collector recognizes when he hears, oh, this weird arm crashed and this warhammer was in there, and he's like, oh, such and such warhammer was only wielded by these people in this time, or also I know that android has one of those, so I'm gonna go check that out. So it's an arm with a hammer. Describe the crash or the crater. We have crystalline, celestial, expansive, or tough. I like crystalline. I don't know where this would be crashing. Maybe it's the same planet as the Abyss. I assume that this sort of takes place in one solar system. That would make the traveling easiest. Maybe there are strange crystals. Maybe the android is made of a sort of glass-like, shining, crystalline material that is very distinctive. So the collector recognizes it right away. It's at this crash site. He's able to give his expertise to his ex-wife bodyguard, and she begrudgingly takes this information and realizes that, hey, maybe we need to be working together on this then. That actually would make sense, because that means that she's sort of lawfully obliged to help him, and it's not just like, we're gonna be doing this together now, but like she has a reason to help her ex-husband, not just, you're my ex-husband, so I'm gonna do it. Like, she has a reason to do this. See, it's all about trying to tightly weave everything together as much as possible so that there's as few loose ends. And we're actually doing a pretty good job of that here. I mean, considering we're just making this up pretty randomly, like it's all kind of coming together. I like the twist ending that we've come up with. Yeah, what caused the crash and why? I mean, yeah, that's actually a good question. What happened to the android that his arm suddenly fell off? I mean, other than like phasing in another time, maybe he got hit by something. So this says we can use a person and an engine, or a person and a thing. So I'm gonna draw anchor card to see what caused the crash. We have a transplant, a microchip, a bioenhancement, an operating room. A microchip, I think, you know, as I said, as this android is phasing uncontrollably in and out of time, reality, etc., you know, he's slowly falling apart, things are malfunctioning. So I think a malfunction in the android's chip is just causing this all to fall apart, and incites the incident where they go together to try and find the android, and they find the serial killer, and things go very, very wrong. So we have created a sci-fi horror mystery thriller game of cat and mouse, where a truth-telling collector, his marriage was ruined because of this truth-telling herb that he was infected with when he narrowly escaped death, must team up with his ex-wife to hunt down an android and the serial-killing creator to stop the serial killer from claiming any more lives with his dangerous technology that he is already on the run for from his government. The story begins with a crash landing of the android's arm. It takes us to the bottom of an abyss in a wreck where the collector was some years ago, the site where he was nearly murdered. They discover the truth about the android, that the android is just trying to stop his creator from killing any more people. But just as they're beginning to work together, the serial killer kidnaps them, takes them to his Hamlet home, where the three of them are pit against each other, and they have to decide, do we work together to escape this crumbling past and stop this serial killer, knowing that none of us might survive? Or is it every man for himself? And maybe it just takes one of us to stop this serial killer. And maybe this phasing technology doesn't have to be destroyed. Maybe I can use it for my own nefarious ends. Wouldn't it be great to use this technology to take anything I want for my own personal collection? Wouldn't it be great to be the best bodyguard on the force, because I can go anywhere at any time and solve all the crimes or prevent crimes from being committed because I can exist in and out of reality? Yes, this is quite the story that we have created here. There are, of course, some unanswered questions that you could further explore by developing this into a real novel outline. You know, if we're going with the twist that the collector is truly self-serving and wants this phasing technology, you know, that would be a slow reveal over time. And what is it about this phasing technology that so interests him? Maybe there's a backstory there, or maybe we can set it up so that the reader thinks that the android is sort of the ultimate prize that the collector wants, but really it's the phasing part of the android that he truly desires. So setting that up and sort of leaving clues for the reader, the viewer, would be part of writing your outline, part of creating that story. We have here that the bodyguard is haunted. You know, what haunts her? Does she have more of a personal connection to this whole story than we really realize? The serial killer killed her parents, or maybe there's more of a personal connection there that could be further teased out. This android, what's the state of artificial intelligence in this sci-fi world? Is this android the only one of its kind, or are androids sort of a standard in the society, and this particular android is interesting because it's a custom built one, and or, you know, because it's phasing in and out of time. The herb that the collector is infected with that makes him tell the truth. You know, what consequences does the collector face here? If he's an unreliable narrator, How can we write this so that the collector is telling the truth? You know, he wants the android. How do we hide from the reader, the audience, that he really wants this phasing technology, and why, right? And what has this collector tried to do to negate the effects of this truth-telling sacred herb? And is that the reason that the bodyguard broke off their marriage? Probably. What kind of government structure is in place in this solar system? How do they find out about this programmer's secret activities? Maybe there's another character here that we need to create to be that other viewpoint so we can see that investigation. Maybe that government employee is the bodyguard's boss, right? Maybe she's been dispatched to deal with this. And that's the connection that we have here. What is the history of this solar system? That we have an abandoned kingdom and, you know, this wreckage where there's murders happening. Do we have a sort of oligarchic society where we kind of let things rot and we have collectors and treasure hunters running amok to sell valuables for people's entertainment? You know, what's sort of the structure here if we have a lot of ruin and decay and people not dealing with it effectively? Maybe there's no real archaeologists here. We just have treasure hunters and profit seekers. So yeah, a lot of questions still have to be answered here for this to be a true, real outline. What's the unanswered question that you have about this story? Or maybe a plot hole that you've discovered that I have not during this recording? Write it down in the comments. If you have enjoyed this kind of storytelling, you might also enjoy the microscope world building series called Let's Build Wingtorn that I also have here on this channel. And you can get started watching that right here.